One of the reasons I make these videos is because it breaks my heart to see people suffering, you know? Like when you're out in the real world and you just observe in people, on their face, in their facial expressions, you can see by their body, their stooped over body, or their movements are laboured. You can see that these people are suffering. And to me that just breaks my heart. But so much of today's suffering is unnecessary suffering, as in we can do away with it. And this is one of the main reasons why I love making these videos, is because I want us to be able to see at a collective level, where is it that our suffering is unnecessary and that we can do away with it, and where is it that it's just like the vicissitudes of life, that natural adversity that we have the innate natural capacity to overcome. So making that distinction is important. So this is why I feel the need to weigh in on what seem to be some of these big sort of societal collective problems. But you know, the way I think about it is if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And I just feel useless otherwise. I want to contribute to human well-being and flourishing and societal flourishing in some way, and so that's why I do these videos. So let's see. Let's begin with this schema of what society is. We have culture underlying government and market. So culture is made up of the citizens of, in the past we would have said a nation, but let's just say citizens of the earth, because we're globalized at this stage. Culture, the function of culture is to keep government true, to stop government from doing corrupt things, pretty much. So that culture checks government, and culture ensures that government is of, for and by the people. Then we get to government, and government is supposed to check market forces, because market forces will, naturally enough, illuminate certain opportunities that allow an individual or an actor to gain massively in the short term, but that costs long-term sustainability. Does that make sense? There are certain market incentives that will push an individual or a company or a corporation to exploit opportunities that in the short term allow them to benefit and gain massively, but in the long run cost long-term sustainability. So government and, well, governance is supposed to check market forces to prevent such exploitation from happening. And then the market itself is simply a mechanism to solve problems, and it's brilliant at that when we point it in the right places. But when the market begins pointing itself towards those massively beneficial short-term but long-term costly opportunities, that's when we start losing the run of ourselves. But so the market produces products and whatnot that benefit culture below. So culture undergirds both government and market. But if culture fails to fulfill its function of checking the government and governance and keeping governance true, then both governance and market begin to collude. Market corrupts governance, market forces corrupt governance systems or the government apparatus, because the market is where the capital is, and capital is just wealth that can be used to buy out the regulatory bodies. If you showed a precocious 6-year-old this schema and you went through that logic, she would easily be able to see that, okay, with money you could just buy out the regulatory bodies and therefore do the highly exploitative, highly costly in the long run actions that the market is pointing you towards. You can just see that that's going to happen, and we're living in a world now that those costs to the market and the government veering off on its own course and colluding with one another and corrupting one another, the costs are now being experienced by us, the culture, the mass of the people below these two components of society in this particular schema.
If the people can't check the state, then the state will end up getting captured by the market. The goal of the state is to bind the predatory aspects of market incentive while leaving the market to do the things that it does well. Okay, so the purpose of a state is to bind the predatory aspects of a market. That only works as long as the people bind the state. And the people bind the state if you have a government of, for, and by the people, of an educated populace who had a quality of education that were capable of understanding all the issues upon which we are governing and making law, and a fourth estate where the news that they are getting is of adequate quality and unbiased enough that they're informed about what's currently happening. If you think about that, that's what a republic would require, and you realize that both public education and the fourth estate have eroded so badly for so long, it's not that we're close to losing our democracy. It's dead. We don't have a republic. We have a permanent political class and a permanent economic lobbying class.
So, an example of a market force determining the path of an individual, a corporation, a company, or some worldly actor, and it having a negative impact on culture below, is when this individual in the market pursues an opportunity that has negative externalities that cause the culture below to be harmed in some way. And we are going to touch on some huge examples of that, contemporary examples of that in this video, because I think it's necessary to understand where we are in terms of this valley, this new landscape of threats that we face. I think it's necessary to understand where we are in this valley so that we can go through this dark night of the soul and come out on the other side still alive, somewhat damaged but still alive. So let's now get into the meat of the matter. Our society clearly benefits massively from the scientific method. Okay? Important caveat here. Not the science, but the scientific method. This camera that I'm shooting this video with, I wouldn't have without unbelievable scientific research. The same can be said for my laptop, same can be said for my guitar probably. Well, actually, anyway. Without science, we would not be living in this modern age of technological wonderment. And so when government and market forces veer off into their own world with one another, the culture beneath is left dumbfounded and they think, what the hell is going on there? But the government apparatus justifies this veering off into the other with one another, this unholy matrimony between government and market. They justify it by feeding the culture below stories that are cloaked in scientific language. So check out Eric Weinstein's tweets here. We're living in a world where we tell our kids that like science is really cool and all, and yet we understand when we're saying that we're lying, because science isn't what it is in its ideal manifestation in our minds. It has become something corrupted for this very reason, because government needs to co-opt science to justify the veering off into the other with market forces, where both the government apparatus and the market forces gain at the expense of culture beneath. And then we also have Brett and Heather on the Darkhorse speaking to this point about where is the real science being done, because science has been co-opted and captured by these forces. Scientific work genuine, authentic scientific work isn't being conducted in the places that it's supposed to be conducted in, such as the academic institutions with their massive libraries and their massive amount of resources to fund proper scientific research and study.
This is having to be worked out by, Professor of Risk Norman Fenton on his Substack in order for it to reach enough people to matter, right, via Darkhorse and then who knows what else. But the point is we are being forced to do the work in the places that do not seem like the right place for the work, because the work is not being done in the places that do seem like the right place for the work. And that haunts every one of these discussions, right? Why is it happening on the Joe Rogan Experience? Because it's not happening elsewhere.
So in that clip, Brett was speaking to Norman Fenton's work on vaccine trials and how they played a statistical game where they ensured that the vaccine will look like it's at least 83% effective. So I don't fully understand this, but I think the idea is if you were to run a placebo against a placebo and do the trick that they did in the experiment to ensure the mathematical trick would show that the vaccine, in this case both placebos, was effective, you would guarantee that the vaccine placebo was at least 83% effective. Because what they did was they shunted people from the vaccinated group into the unvaccinated group if those people developed COVID within the 2-week period between having been vaccinated and 2 weeks having elapsed. So that's one of the ways that the unholy matrimony between the government and the market forces justify what they're doing, despite it being blatantly obvious that they're damaging people, they're harming people in the culture below. And that's actually where the landscape of threats is. Like, we need to be able to see these threats for what they are and point out, okay, that's because of collusion between these two components in society, and we need to step up and stop that. Anyway, it's the appropriation of science and the science being co-opted and used in such a way to justify their actions. They use scientific language, they cloak what they're saying in a scientific garb, they make sure to have all the scientific trappings, the lab coat, the expensive equipment, the grants, whatnot, all this just to convince you that this is right and proper, because appeals to God don't work anymore, but appeals to the science apparently have the same effect nowadays. Now we get to the second way in which government and the market can skip away into the sunset happily, hand in hand, without culture beneath saying much. And this is quite scary. It's only been fleshed out, really. It's the censorship-industrial complex. And it's terrifying. This is actually Orwellian, 1984, George Orwell, as fuck. Check out this clip by Michael Schellenberger.
It was widespread. It was a very intensive and coordinated activity by multiple government agencies in the United States, in the UK, requesting censorship on myriad issues. We mentioned transgenderism, climate change, COVID was a huge one. I mean, maybe the most egregious is where White House officials demanding that Facebook censor people for sharing true stories about vaccine side effects. Mm-hmm. This is particularly offensive, it should be particularly offensive to progressives in the United States, because there had been a huge effort to require pharmaceutical companies to name the side effects of their drugs in their television ads. And here people were describing the side effects of this drug to them on themselves, and you had the government demanding that it be censored. The demand was made that it be censored, not because it was misinformation, not because it was disinformation, but because it was true information that might lead to vaccine hesitancy, to a reluctance on the part of people to get vaccines. So we're in 1984 Orwell territory.
So that's sort of malinformation.
Malinformation is what they call it.
True information that's inconvenient.
Exactly. Uh-huh. That result in behaviors that we don't like. Well, at that point, I mean, you could justify censorship of anything.
So people actually in culture, beneath market and government, individuals posting on Facebook about the vaccine injuries that they've experienced, they're being censored. This is crazy, and it's because the justification being malinformation, true information that is inconvenient, or true information that may lead to behaviours that are undesirable. It's like, who is going to define desirable and undesirable behaviour? Who is going to define that? If the state defines that, oh my god, we are in authoritarian, totalitarian. I don't even know the words to describe this, but it's 1984. It's Orwellian. It seems that what we have done as humans, as collective humanity, is replace one authority with another. And Heather speaks to this in the podcast.
These proxies for science that are useful for those who don't think scientifically, who don't think of themselves as scientists, go like, oh God, I'm supposed to follow the science, I'm supposed to trust the science. We live in a post-religion world. I'm a secularist. I don't know what to believe. I know I'm supposed to trust the science. I'm going to look for the guy in the lab coat over there. Does he have a degree? Cool. Is he tenured somewhere? Awesome. Does he have a lot of grants? Terrific. Okay, I'm going to listen to him. Not the way science works. Just not the way it works. So all you've done is replace one authority for another. And are you surprised that the new authority is lying to you?
So we've replaced the religious authority with a secular scientific authority. And all that secular scientific authority has to do is cloak what they say in scientific garb. And we, humans in the cultural layer, will simply agree with whatever they have to say, despite not truly understanding why they're saying that and why they're using that as a justification for their actions. Probably one of the strangest things about this is that this new authority, instead of it being a sort of a discrete God, God at least is somewhat of an individual human who you can appeal to. This is like an amorphous blob of the political class and the economic class joining together and pursuing their own ends and making sure to fog up and make unclear the information ecology surrounding what they're doing in order to get away with what they're doing. And they do that fogging up by capturing the scientific research humans who do science research and capturing the academic institutions in which this research is done to justify their actions. This is unbelievable. So no doubt this stuff is very, very uncomfortable. But I think, if not now then when, we have to go through the dark night of our soul and understand it for what it is and actually stop deluding ourselves. Let's stop lying to ourselves. It's a fact that these vaccines were rolled out when they perhaps shouldn't have been. Where were the regulatory bodies to point out the fact that in the trials, when you shunt people from one category to the other, you're going to ensure this mathematical trick arises that guarantees at least 83% efficacy, which itself then guarantees that these things are going to be put onto the market. Like, where was the regulatory body then to stop that from, or to point that out and then say, hang on, is this not BS?
The whole point of having a batch number is so this can be done. The whole point of, I've been writing batch numbers down for the last 40 years after giving medications and vaccines and different things. And the whole point is, if there's an adverse event, we can go back and look at the batch. Why did the regulatory authorities let us down, completely fail, you and me, on this ongoing post-marketing surveillance that we were promised? It hasn't happened according to the batch, apart from a few independent, hard-working Danish academics, bless them, who've done a fantastic job. So we're, as individuals in the cultural layer, we are the ones who experience the negative effects of this corruption in the top government market layer. Lee Fang on UnHerd proposes a reason for why the investigative journalist houses aren't doing the work they need to do, and this is why we get the likes of Fenton on Substack through Darkhorse. This is how
that research is being popularized. Or even John Campbell, he posted a video there this morning about the adverse events, how common adverse events were given the batch of Pfizer vaccines. Like, where was this research way back when? And why is it coming through John Campbell, Norman Fenton and the Darkhorse, Lee Fang on his Substack, and then subsequently on UnHerd? Why isn't this on the front pages of the major investigative journalist houses? In America, the New York Times and the likes. And Lee Fang proposes that it's because, for the New York Times anyway, they switched to a subscription model, and in tailoring their content to their audience, which is largely made up of left-leaning people who have left-leaning political views, they tailor their content to them, and so that prevents them from doing the rigorous truth-seeking journalistic work that they otherwise would have been doing.
But what about the New York Times? What about these major investigative houses that should be in some sense independent? Why does it land with you on your Substack to be looking into Pfizer's back channels when in actual fact there are these huge organizations claiming to be doing effective investigative journalism? Where is it on the front page of the New York Times?
That's a great question. I'm informed by my understanding of these issues from historical reading of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Financial Times, other media outlets on pharma's influence over the years. I mean, this is not new. These strategies are more interesting because the mandates are so unprecedented. But these lobbying tactics, using civil rights organizations, medical organizations, patient organizations to kind of manufacture consent for various pharmaceutical policies, this is an old strategy. This is something that's been reported in the New York Times in previous debates. Why they don't take on this issue now? I mean, I don't have a direct answer for that. I don't have a causation here, but it's the New York Times and other media outlets have shifted away from more balanced journalism towards a little bit more of a partisan edge. The New York Times in particular made a huge fortune shifting to a subscription-based model with a more left-leaning Democratic Party base. And on a number of coverage areas, there are still dozens and dozens of incredible journalists and editors there. I don't want to knock their journalistic abilities at all, but the coverage has shifted over the years. It's become a slightly more partisan newspaper, and because COVID and vaccines have become this polarized issue, for any Democratic-leaning organization, left-leaning organization, any criticism of mandate policy or vaccine policy makes you immediately branded as anti-science or a threat to human health, threat to health. So I don't know, but why they're not doing this type of reporting that they have done in the past in previous debates, but they certainly are.
And then he also says at the beginning of that podcast that the vaccine pharmaceutical is the most lucrative, the most profitable pharmaceutical ever created in human history.
This is the Pfizer vaccine, which was partnered with German company BioNTech. This was the most lucrative pharmaceutical product in human history. There is no parallel. And while Pfizer did not publicly comment on the mandate, I think they understood the public relations risk of endorsing a government mandate requiring the administration and purchase of their product. They seem to have a role in shaping this from the outside, from various community organizations, lobbying groups, and healthcare, civil rights, and consumer organizations that did their lobbying on their behalf. And that gets to my story that you referenced at the beginning of your show.
So I don't know, there's maybe political reasons for why the information ecology is being so thoroughly polluted by what these people are doing and saying. But there's maybe also economic reasons for why that information ecology is so polluted. And that actually maps perfectly onto the tripartite schema that we covered at the beginning of this video. So I hope you're not getting discouraged by this. I certainly sometimes feel discouraged, but at the same time, I would rather continue deeply understanding this dark night of the human soul so that we have the best chance of getting out on the other side, finding a new adaptive peak instead of being restricted to this valley and then actually never finding a peak, actually dying out. instead of that, I'd like to commit my individual life to contributing to humanity in such a way that I can at least do my best to ensure that we reach a new adaptive peak. And also to reduce human suffering. Unnecessary human suffering is so unnecessary.